And then all these studies came out that said, well, first of all, these low-fat diets actually didn't work at all. So there's the Lyon study, and there's a number of other studies that led to this whole, remember the French paradox, where they said, hey, these French people are eating way more fat. They're eating this full-fat dairy, crazy people, and they're eating like meat and like foie gras and stuff. Like they're crazy. They're going to get heart attacks. But of course, they had a third of the heart disease that Americans did, right? Because the fat wasn't that bad for you. So this led to this whole discussion about the French paradox. And that was where people said, well, you know, we know that fat is bad and they're eating a lot of fat. So therefore, they must be doing something else right, which is the red wine. And it's like, okay, well, that might have been true or not. But it was probably that the fat just wasn't that bad for you. And then in the 2000s, they came out with all these studies that started to show that, hey, there's a ton of fat sources, dietary fat sources that were really, really good for you, like omega-3s and fatty fish and nuts and olive oil, Mediterranean diet and avocados and all this stuff, right? It was just, you know, a total repudiation of what we did in the 90s. So then, of course, you know, everybody started eating more fat. And then now, you know, the people talk about saturated fat, and there's a lot of evidence that even the stuff, the butter. So the tragic thing about the butter, of course, was that people said saturated fat like butter was bad for you, right? So you should eat margarine. So you'll remember all this stuff. So, oh my God. So margarine was vegetable oils, but is worse than that. They actually changed it so that they processed it even further into trans fats, which we now know are really, really bad for you. So it's estimated that these trans fats caused about 100,000 plus heart attacks and deaths in the United States every year. So that was due to the trans fats. So we told people, in other words, as doctors and dietitians and nurses, we told people to eat the butter, to switch from the butter to the margarine, because it'll be healthier for your heart, and you'll remember Bissell and all that stuff. And in fact, what we told them to eat, the margarine, was actually causing the heart attacks. Like, that is so tragic. I can't believe that nobody even talks about it anymore. So of course, butter sales plummeted and margarine sales went up, and then everybody got their heart attacks. And then, you know, 20 years later, in 2015 or so, 2012, people are like, hey, you know, those trans fats were all killing us. And now it's totally reversed, and butter's going back up and margarine's going back down. It's like, well, why did we think that we were so much smarter than Mother Nature? Butter, which is a natural food that we've been eating for thousands of years. Like, why did we think that butter, we've been eating it for 1,000 years, and since 1970, it's going to kill us, right? It's like, how does that work? As opposed to margarine, which we had never eaten, you know, it's much more likely to kill us because our bodies just haven't had a chance to adapt to it. So it was a sort of a whole tragic story about this dietary fat thing. Caused a lot of disease, a lot of heart attacks, you know, people getting sick and obese and type 2 diabetic. And yet still nobody says, like, you know, it was all our fault, right? Like, as a medical scientific community, we should never have really gone that far off into the deep end without demanding the evidence that it was actually true, which nobody ever did. And that, I think, is the big problem. Like, all the naysayers who said, you know, fat's not that bad for you, they're like, oh, these guys are quacks, right? They're going to kill people, like with their olive oil and their avocados and nuts. Like, they're going to kill people, right? That's what you said. That's what we said in the 90s. It was really, you know, sort of a tragic time